Wow, hello. Welcome back to our second ever episode of Craig and Dave Unscripted. So, look, firstly, I guess Dave, thank you for all the comments everyone's been leaving on the first video. It's really nice. We didn't know where this would go. Would you like it? Was it worth it? But yeah, well, we're here doing another one, so we think you like it, basically. So yeah, we didn't really give too much away last time with what we're going to do. We've had a little think. We've got and you've got ideas coming in comments as well, which is brilliant. But we thought we would start with a couple of videos on our experience of computers and technology. So we are going to start way back in 1978 to 1980, and so we were calling this the early years. And I should point out at this point, if we're talking 1978, it's still a year until I'm born, because Dave is older than Craig. That's a fact.
Yeah, but does he look it? That's the question.
So we'll head over to Dave. I'll jump in at various points, especially when I'm born. But yes, initially we go all the way back to 1978. So Dave, go on, off you go.
Yeah, cheers, Craig. Well, back in 1978, I had thick blonde hair then, believe it or not. And one of the comments did make me chuckle from our first video where, best wishes were being bestowed upon us and great locks of hair. And I kind of remember those days, but it's a long, long time ago.
Me too, vaguely.
Yeah. So, well, starting at 1978, I wasn't born in 1978. I was about 4 years old at that point, but it's my earliest recollection of computer science. And I've got a very, very vague memory. I must have been about 3 or 4 years old. I'm really not sure. But I remember that my dad used to get called into work occasionally. And no babysitter or whatever, he would sometimes sort of drag me in, and he would sit me down on a chair and give me something to do while he was trying to do whatever he was trying to do. And I remember I didn't know what it was at the time, but he sat me in front of this thing that looked a bit like a typewriter. And
cue image. I'm still not good at this.
And he would give me a deck of sort of cards, and the cards had numbers on them, and you put the cards in this little machine, and you would literally press the little buttons, and it would sort of punch holes like a hole punch into these cards, and you can see where the little black dots are, where it would sort of punch a hole through the card. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like, random monkey pressing buttons on this thing and busy writing, the entire work of Shakespeare. Obviously not, but this is my earliest recollection. And of course, what could I have been doing there, Craig? I mean, what was I actually doing there?
Well, I mean, so it all comes down to, doesn't it? How is information stored in a computer system? I mean, if you study computer science, you know that, fundamentally, take away all the layers of abstraction, go as low as you can go. And at the end of the day, everything is being stored in bits, binaries, zeros and ones. And, although we don't see that when you're sat there writing your Python or your VB, you can start to see, a much closer correlation here between what the machine is actually doing and reading and what you're effectively programming on this punch card. I mean, there you go. There's a program. I mean, that's it.
Yeah, of course you had decks of these cards, and you wouldn't want to drop them and put them all out of order and whatnot. But yeah, this is the earliest days of secondary storage, and the language that you were using there was Fortran, which is sort of a mathematical language. So that's my earliest recollection. I can't be exactly sure how old I was because it's a very, very vague memory, but I must have been about 3 or 4 years old.
Yeah.
So, what next? Oh, Craig, you remember this one?
Oh, I actually do. I actually owned one of those, a little Professor backwards calculator. And it wasn't until you said, let's do this kind of history of tech thing, and we started putting together images, that I looked at that and went, I remember owning that. So I honestly had, and the Speak and Spell as well, and the Speak and Spell. That was the height of technological toys. So, you know, stop complaining at Christmas or birthdays.
Yeah, that little professor was what they call a backwards calculator, because it would show you a sum like, you know, 5 plus 6, and you would have to type in the answer. So it was back to front in that sense. But yeah, I remember these really early toys.
Yeah, I'd actually forgotten that. What's that Bigtrak thing? I don't recognise that
Bigtrak
at all.
Bigtrak was massive. I just remember it being, you know, if you had a Bigtrak, then, you know, you were, you know, the kid on the street. I didn't have one. I'm not sure if my parents could afford it, or it just wasn't on my radar. I'm not sure. But this kind of thing, you know, you'd only get it at Christmas. If you were going to get it, you'd get it at Christmas. And one of my friends down the road had one of these, and it was amazing, because it was my first experience of programming, if you can call it that. So it had a little keypad where you could type in commands, and you can just see that on the top of the Bigtrak there. And I think I've got a little image of that actually, Craig.
Oh, let's have a look. Oh, you do?
Yeah. And so you give it very simple commands, like you press the green up arrow and then tell it you want it to go 5, and then you press the right arrow and tell it you want to go 90 degrees. And it literally could move, and it could fire by flashing its little blue light on the front there. And you could actually get a trailer for it. Now, you know, my friend had a trailer because my friend had a bit of everything that I didn't have. And there was a command called out, I think it was, and that would drop the trailer. So you put a can of Coke on the trailer, and you program it to go into, you know, Dad, who was next door, and deliver the can of beer or the can of Coke or whatever.
That's crazy, because although literally I have no recollection of that, but as I said, you know, not even born at this point, but you were there just talking about, you know, go forward, turn right, turn left. And it just makes me think of like implementations of Logo and Turtle that I did at primary school. And then obviously, you know, a lot of I know a lot of students will be familiar with the Turtle library in Python, and there it is, effectively same sort of, you know, basic simple commands. Could you do iteration and loops? Could you say go forward, go right, do this 4 times, or is it not even that?
No, you could say do it twice from memory. I'm not sure, but I think you could say, you know, go forward 10, right 90, repeat that twice, and then you'd have to put that command in again and tell it to repeat twice in order for it to go around in a square shape. So you could do that, but it was restricted to 16 commands. You couldn't give it more than 16 commands because of the limitations on the RAM, so you couldn't do much with it really.
God, which would be measured in a kilobytes, blimey, if that. Right, okay, let's whiz forward. I say whiz. Right, 1981 to 1982. So I'm 2 or 3 at this point. Dave's about 18, I think.
Dave's about 6 or 7 years old.
So right, I get another one. I've never heard. Never
seen Astro Wars. Astro Wars was amazing. This was like the first console that I ever sort of experienced, and it was playing a kind of Space Invaders, Galaxians kind of thing. It would make very simple sounds, and you could move your spaceship left and right, and you can fire. But what was interesting about it is that, apart from it being my first experience of a game, I suppose, on a computer, was that the sprite, it didn't have sprites. You weren't moving things. What it had was this I think it was called a VFD display, and that's basically like LCD, but it was colored. I'm not quite sure how that all worked, if I'm honest, but when you pressed left, for example, it would unlight the sort of LCD bit that you were on, and it would then light the LCD bit to the left of where you were. So all your positions of your ship and the little invaders and all the bullets were all kind of predetermined. So there was no collision.
Nothing moved.
Nothing moved. No, nothing moved at all. Nothing could move. Nothing could touch. Nothing could intersect. It was literally like an LCD display, but it had a bit of color on there.
I mean, very quick segue. I mean, you just think, I mean, 1981, we're saying here, that's 40 years. 2021 at the point of making this video, to go from that to, well, PS5s came out 2021. I mean, that is phenomenal. 40 years is half a lifetime. 40 years from now, it's well, mind blown. Right, okay, let's push on.
I feel a bit spoiled in a way, because I was growing up at a time where families didn't have computers, schools didn't have computers, and so the first time you kind of caught sight of an electronic device or here we've got a computer, we'll talk about this one in a minute, it was magic. It was like nothing you had ever seen before.
Forget a like tablet and smartphone in everyone's hand and a smart TV connecting to your your PS5 or your Xbox. I mean, blimey, your smart fridge, your smart toaster, and everything else.
I mean, we could go out, we used to go out and play. That's what we used to do, go and build dens in the wooded area and, play cricket in the field and that kind of stuff. And, now we were staying in, and I think it frightened our parents because they were like, oh, this is no good for them. There was a lot of fear. Anyway. This is the ZX81. So how much RAM has this thing got, Craig?
Yeah, I'm aware of this one. I didn't own one because I'm still too young. I think this has a whole whopping 56K of usable RAM.
Usable RAM, yeah. It's got 1K of RAM, but you can only use 56K of it because obviously you've got operating systems and other things.
Oh, ridiculous. And what was the speed of this bad boy, considering we measure average CPUs in a modern desktop now at 3.x gigahertz? I mean, what was this at?
Well, this is about 3.5 megahertz, which actually, it doesn't sound very much, but 3.5 million instructions a second. I mean, it's still quite a large number to get your head round. Especially, you're right. I mean, that is, nothing like today's processors, obviously. And of course, you didn't connect it to a monitor. You connected it to a TV, and it wasn't color. It was black and white.
Wow. So what sort of games were people playing on these? Oh, look at this. Classic Space Invaders. Oh, Space Invaders, Pac-Man. Oh, Asteroids. Yeah. Proper original. This is when, I mean, I'm still not quite in at this point, but obviously I played these and it's just thinking this is new. I mean, this was the future.
It's groundbreaking. Absolutely groundbreaking. Now, my parents couldn't afford one of these. This is the Atari 2600. Right. My parents couldn't afford it. Here he is. And you could have 2-player, so you could have 2 joysticks. And it was fantastic because you put those little cartridges in and the software was actually, on the cartridges. And this just kind of revolutionized, home entertainment. This is like nothing anyone had ever seen before. And I used to, of course, my friends had these, right? So they used to play them. So for them, it was like, oh, should we go outside and play? And I'd be like, no, can we go inside and play? And they'd be like, no, I'm bored of the Atari. Can we go out? I'm like, please, can I play your Atari?
Generation. The birth of the computer geek. I mean, look at that there. Video computer system. Proudly stamped across the top of the Atari.
Yeah. But I mean, you could play Space Invaders and Pac-Man, and I mean, you saw them at a distance in the arcade. My parents didn't let me play those kinds of things, so I sort of saw them and flashing lights and buttons, and it was just like, wow, this is amazing, this is magical. What are these things? And now all of a sudden, you could play this in your house, not in my house, but in my friend's house when I could persuade him.
Yeah, we've probably upped now, haven't we, the amount of storage? I mean, this probably blew the Sinclair ZX81 out the water, didn't it? Cutting edge.
Yeah, well, not necessarily in processor speed, but of course it's dedicated hardware. So whereas this isn't, a personal computer as such, because it's got dedicated hardware. The processor doesn't need to run quite so fast. So only a single megahertz, I think, on this device, but you have 4K, so 4 times the amount of memory. But it was on ROM cartridges. They're read-only memory cartridges, as opposed to the RAM of the ZX81. But it had a little trick, which is quite nice. It could switch which bank of memory it was using. So on those ROM cards, you could you had 4K chips, but you could get up to 64K's worth of chips on those ROM cartridges. And it would use this technique called bank switching. So it would switch which bank of memory it was actually using, and then you could, drive it up to 64K. I mean, 64K, mind, 64,000 bytes. That's all we're really talking about here. But that was a massive amount of ROM. And then the working memory, the RAM for sort of remembering your score and where you are in the game and all those kinds of things, 128 bytes. But it was an amazing system.
Yeah. Now here's another one I've never heard of. Obviously heard of the Atari and Sinclair, but the Grandstand. I feel like this passed by as a bit of a non-event, or not.
Well, let me be honest. I think this was for the poor kids. So this is what I did have. So my parents didn't get me an Atari 2600, and this isn't a bash on my parents because I love them to bits, but we just didn't have a lot of money, and they did the best they could for me, and they'd try and make they would make Christmas special for me, and
but look at that as a piece of tech. Imagine unwrapping that back then. I mean, it looked like something you'd see on the bridge of the original Star Trek series. Now it's laughable, but back then.
I mean, my friends, they had the 2600. It was amazing, but I got a Grandstand for Christmas, and I loved it because it was mine, and it was mine. This has got an interesting fact associated with it as well. Actually, I think I've got a picture of one of the games.
Oh, Submarine, this one.
Yeah, Submarine. Yeah. Right, a couple of interesting things here. So, firstly, you'll notice the battered case here. It's game number 5. Now, this was a cartridge. You did plug it in, but there were only 10 of them. So they could number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Wow.
And you would buy them. You buy them as separate cartridges, but which one you buy? And number 5 was one of my favorites. Number 5 was Submarine. And you can see the graphics. And it was quite simply that you had a submarine at the bottom. You could move left and right, and you could fire rather oddly torpedoes upwards, but hey ho. And then you had the little destroyer, I think it was, in the middle there that could throw depth charges down to the submarine, sort of only one at a time, no rapid fire going on. And the object of the game, if you were the submarine, was to try and get that big ship that's on the kind of horizon level there. And the objective, if you were the destroyer, was to destroy the submarine, and it would just count up your score. And it was as simple as that. But what was really unique about this is that unlike the Atari 2600, the cartridges had the processor on them. So it was kind of flipped round the other way. So all the console did was provide an interface to your TV, and the CPU was actually on the cartridge. So when you bought Submarine number 5, you were actually buying a whole mini computer that you would then plug into this little console to play on your TV. So that was really unique.
No wonder they only made 10. Absolutely crazy. Right. Let's whiz forward into the far future now. I'm going to talk about high tech, 1983 to 1987. So I can start to pass some comment on my experiences now, but we'll carry on with you first because I've got the pictures in order. But I remember this one, the ZX Spectrum,
this
the Rainbow.
ZX Spectrum. This blew me away when I saw this. Because this was the first, what I would say, real useful computer that I'd seen. And again, my friend had this. I did not have a Spectrum. I wanted a Spectrum, of course I did, and I would do anything to try and get my mate to play this. And of course, he was bored of it, and I never got chance to ever play it unless he was willing to play it. So I remember my childhood years being so fascinated with these devices that I couldn't play because I didn't own them. that I was desperate to try and get into my friend's house and play them. And I think that's where that urge for computer science came from. It was a mixture of flashing lights, buttons and levers, fascination, and the fact that I didn't have it made me want it.
And I tell you what, those graphics, if I just pop back to Submarine, you were doing Submarine, and now you had this.
Well, I didn't, but yeah.
Okay.
My friend did. Yeah.
So things really stepping up a bit. And then, of course, I definitely remember these BBC.
Yeah, hang on a minute though. Let's go back a minute. Go back a minute, because you've got
Dave really is reminiscing. Yeah.
Well, this is Manic Miner. You've got to mention Manic Miner. It's amazing. They had levels called Pi R squared, but the music was iconic on this, absolutely iconic. And look at the little player character, right? He's got a white body and a red head. Well, if you move outside of that platform, he's got a white head. The only reason his head is red is because of the platform. This is how basic it all is. But when you died, a boot kind of came down and went meep, and like squashed you, and it was amazing. I'd never seen anything like it. But Manic Miner is brilliant. If you hunt on YouTube, I think there's like a mini documentary on the making of Manic Miner. I'm not sure, but some bloke made this in about 4 weeks, from what I remember, and it was a massive hit.
Bonkers. Right, moving on. The BBC Micro, a 2 megahertz machine with an actual hard disk in it, I believe. This one, didn't it?
No, floppy disk.
No, still floppy disk. Sorry, still no secondary storage.
Yeah, no, these are 5 1/4 inch floppy disks, and they truly were floppy. But this, that was a revolution, because before that they were 8-inch floppies, so this was smaller. Wow. Yeah. So memories of the BBC. Have you got memories of the BBC, Craig?
I have very few memories of the BBC. I have one which I'm going to come on to later. It's my first experience of playing a computer game, but I'm still 6 at this point, and the only relative or friend I've got that's got one is my uncle. But yeah, I'll come on to that. It's the first PC I played a computer game on. Right.
So this
there it is.
Yeah, there it is. There's the 5 1/4 inch floppy disk, 360K incidentally on there. So that was amazing. And you could, I think you could get it up to 1.2 megabytes, because you could get them double-sided, and you could actually get some drives where you could take the disk out, turn it round, and put it back in again. They were called flippy disks. But the modern drive,
you had to lock a little handle over the drive.
Yeah.
Put it in.
Yeah, and you hope the little spring on the other end actually sprung your disc back out so you could grab hold of it. But I say the modern drives, very 1983, right? Modern then. It could read both sides of the disc through that little, not through the middle window. That's just through this little area there, yeah. And it could read the top side and the underside. So that's how you managed to get like double density or whatever it was called. I can't remember the ins and outs of it. That little notch there. Do you know what that little notch is for?
Was that the read-only write notch? Or was I thinking, yes, and that transferred onto the floppy disk later on, the smaller one.
But what was weird was that it was the opposite of the 8-inch disc, from what I remember. So the 8-inch discs, right, if it was open, like you're seeing there, it meant that it was locked, and you had to cover it if you wanted it to be writable. With the 5 1/4, it was the other way around. So if it was unlocked like that, it meant that you could write to the disk, and if you put a bit of tape over it, as long as it wasn't see-through tape, because it's a photo transistor, so as long as it was a bit of dark tape or something that you put over there, then you couldn't write on the disk. And that was the kind of early read-write permissions. That's how that worked. But go back to that BBC Micro picture a minute. You need to indulge me, because this is
I'm going to indulge you, but we've been going for 25 minutes, Dave, and I've barely even talked about my first computer, so you indulge yourself. But if I cut you off, go on.
Right. You can't pass by the B without a few words. So this was my first introduction to real programming, I suppose. And this is when I started writing these sorts of programs. So I was about 9-10 years old, started writing some very rudimentary programs. But I was involved, I think it was 1986, I might be wrong about that. I was involved in the Doomsday project, where they were celebrating. I should know this because it was the 900th anniversary of the Doomsday book, and Craig will tell me when. Craig will correct me on my history probably in a minute, but the 900th anniversary of the Doomsday book, and so they got tens of thousands of kids up and down the country that were in school to write something about where they lived, about their lives, something. I can't remember the ins and outs of it, but I wrote something for the Doomsday project back in, I think it was 1986. And so there were a couple of really influential bits of software. One was that Doomsday book thing. Another was the Tombs of Arkenstone, which I remember very fondly. And the other, you cannot have a presentation like this without mentioning Elite.
Yeah, I mean, there you are.
Come on. This was vector graphics. It had not been done before. 1984. Amazing. We'd never seen anything like it. None of those polygons were filled. None of those polygons are textured. It's all wireframe. But games had not been made like this, because this was the first sort of open world, go and do what you want to do sort of thing, and the game isn't going to kind of take you where it wants to take you. You can do what you want here, and it mind blown. And on the BBC, you had an automatic docking computer, and that was something else.
Right. So I'm going to move on to the Commodore 64, but first, do you spot the did you pick up on my Alexa doorbell going off during that earlier bit? The irony that this is what we're talking about here in the history of computing, and now my Internet of Things doorbell is talking to my Home Assistant Alexa, and I think I'm going to leave that in. I mean, it's just it's just bonkers how far we've come. Right, I'm going to push you on. Commodore 64, go.
I didn't have one.
Neither did I.
Parents didn't buy me one again, but my mate had one, of course. And look, it's got a tape deck. It's got a tape that you can load programs from a tape, and you can save them from tape to tape. And it's like, wow, this is amazing. This was the era when you would copy, or not me, obviously, I didn't own one anyway, but you could copy games, put them into a double deck tape recorder and press play on one side and record and play on the other side, and you could basically record a tape and copy a game. These things used to take, and you most know this from the ZX Spectrum, these things would take 20 minutes to load. 20 minutes to load. You double click an icon now, and if you see the little hourglass spinning and it takes more than a second or so to load your software, you're like, what's going on? Computer's broken. This took 20 minutes to load a simple game, But I'll tell you what was special.
Go on.
Hang on a minute. I'll tell you what was special about that Commodore 64, though. 1 to 2 megahertz processor, I believe.
Yeah.
But it had a sprite chip. I don't know the ins and outs of this, but it could do games so much better than the ZX Spectrum and other machines that were out at the time, because it had dedicated hardware for sprites. And if you've got dedicated hardware for sprites, obviously you can do games very, very well. So anybody that wanted to play decent games, they owned a Commodore 64.
And of course, if we're talking early gaming, it wouldn't be complete without a little crappy plastic joystick. I remember that.
How dare you call this crappy? It's got 2 buttons. The Atari one only had 1. Come on, this is.
And of course, now everyone is used to the standard handheld controller for a modern console. L1, L2, R1, R2. It's just like 16 different configurable options, and just flipping between everything. Yeah, you got 2 buttons. That was something. Yeah. Oh, I did have a friend who had this one. Oh, almost getting on to my first experience now. Amstrad, CP464. And I don't know why, but when you first saw one of these, I remember seeing one of these, it felt futuristic just because they'd gone for all these kind of like creamy and wood colors before, but it was black. And we had green keys and a red key and a blue key. So it looked and felt modern, which sounds bizarre looking at the picture now, but this felt like a futuristic bit of kit. And of course, we're up to 4 megahertz at this point. So
this is quite a piece of kit. Now, I remember this is probably my best Christmas day ever in my entire life, apart from my own kids opening their presents on Christmas Day, obviously, but I'm just speaking personally. My best Christmas ever was when I unwrapped an Amstrad CPC 464, and I was like, wow, this is unbelievable. Now, you know, we weren't very well off, so I didn't have a color monitor. I had a green screen, and that's what you can see in this picture.
Yeah.
So everything was green. It was monochrome, but instead of being monochrome black and white, it was monochrome green and black, and you had different shades of green. So I didn't have a color monitor, but that didn't stop me. It didn't bother me. And you know, built-in tape deck. Look at that. So you didn't have a peripheral; it was built in to the keyboard area there. And I had the best times of my childhood on this Amstrad. This is where I learned to program. And there it is. There it is. So back in the day, when you bought a computer, you got a manual with it.
Yeah.
And this is it. This is the manual for the CPC 464. So let me just share with you a minute. Craig, you can do this for me. Flip over.
Yeah. There you go. That one.
Here we go. So this is looking at the inside pages now. I mean, it's a PDF copy of it, but you get the idea. Let's navigate to page 27 a minute, because I want to show you what it was like learning programming back in the day here. Okay, so page 27. Let me zoom in just a little. Oops. Let me zoom in a little bit onto that if I can. Okay. So this is the page where you learn about a for next loop. Okay. And it gives you a little bit of code. And then it says down here, try this program for multiplication tables. And this is, you know, this is how we learned to program. Type in a little bit of code, give it a run, see what it does. And you know, this is how we teach programming today as well. And it's really, really successful. And I'll just skip ahead very quickly to, you then got at the back of the book, a keyword summary, glossary, all the keywords that you could use in this language. And I used to read these over and over and over again, and I would memorize them. So I knew every single command in BASIC. And I knew what it did. Yeah. And I'd then start making my own games in this language. And it was absolutely incredible. So I was sort of writing very simple games when I was about 10 years old.
Yeah, I think we've got a code listing for a computer game here. Look at that. I mean, I mean, if you showed that code list, and we understood what that was, because we're talking about BASIC now, and I'm going to mention that in a minute. My first program in BASIC, yeah, we used to know that was, and no one taught that to us.
No, and that's the thing, isn't it? That's the thing. Nobody taught us. We had a book, and it contained a couple of, a few simple programs to type in and see what they did, followed by a keyword glossary. That was your lot. And then I used to get a magazine called Amstrad Action, and in there were little code listings. And here's an example of a code listing. This isn't from Amstrad Action, but they were like these. And I mean, look at that code for a start. What's going on? Where's the procedures? Well, you didn't have procedures. You had go stub. That was the command. And you got quite a lot of commands all on one line. And notice all the lines are numbered, like 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got a few comments in there, which are signified with the little apostrophe. And then we've got line 10, line 20, line 30, line 40. And the reason that the code lines went up in tens is because if you accidentally forgot something, then you had to insert it in the middle. So if you forgot a command between line 20 and 30, you'd then create line 25 and you'd put your command in there, just in case you'd then forgotten a command between line 20 and 25, because there was no renumbering of the program.
You'd have to do it manually. Yeah. Oh, blimey. What's that?
Right. That is what my friend had when he had an Amstrad, because of course he always, he had to have the better model.
So he had the better version, right?
Of course. So not only is this a color monitor, not a TV, a color monitor, but this is the Amstrad 6128, 128K. So mine was only 64. Now I was happy with my 64 because my mate obviously only had a Spectrum 48K. So he had 48K, I had 64. But then my other friend that had the Commodore with the Sprite chip, he's like, he had 64 as well. I was like, oh, well, whatever. Anyway, this little baby is using 3-inch flippable discs. They were quite proprietary, I think, to Amstrad, but they were hard. They were physically hard, but they were still floppy disks because the media inside was still floppy.
Blimey, right.
180K a side on that disc, mind. 180K a side.
God, it's all up to 300. You know, we're not too far off. Half a meg. We're not too far off there.
So what was Craig up to at this point in time?
Yeah, I think I'm going to say what I'm up to. I think we're going to have to stop this one and split it into 2 parts, Dave, because no one's going to listen to me otherwise. So yeah, what was I up to around this point? So I was around 6-ish years old at this point when I had my first experience of a computer game at my uncle's house. He was the only friend or relative I knew that had one. It was a BBC Basic, and that is the game I played. Do you recognise that?
That, of course, that is Chucky Egg.
That is Chucky Egg. And I used to then find excuses to go to my uncle's house. Every time I went over, I could play it. We'd have dinner and it'd be like, get off the computer, get back on again. I loved it. That was it. Until then, there were no computers in my school, you know, nothing else. I mean, that was my first experience. I mean, I'm sort of 6 at this point. I'm barely in sort of the second year of infant or primary school. And what is this? That is what got me into computers. It made me want to own my own computer. So I'm actually going to switch out a second here because just remove that. Yeah, it made me want my own computer. And I kept pestering my dad. He was like, fine, you can have a Spectrum 128K. They cost like £110, but you have to save your pocket money. Me and my brother saved for about a year and got our first ever computer that we could play games on. And as a coincidence, look at that. Now, confession, it is not actually the Spectrum 38K I owned when I was 9 years old. But my partner got me this for Christmas as a throwback. Managed to find it off a user. But there it is. Tape deck, the whole 9 yards. Again, came with one of those futuristic joysticks with 2 buttons. I've actually rigged this up and played it. Although we had to get an old telly and a conversion lead to play it. Can't plug it into my smart TV, can I? There's no HDMI on the back of this thing. So yeah, what was I playing on that? Well, again, as Dave said, I'm in the era of tapes now. So, and these all still work. These still work. Spiky Harold and Buggy Boy. I've got about, I don't know, 20 or 30 of these back there, and they work. But again, I tell you what, the memories when I plugged this in on Christmas Day and got it all working, and then literally pressed play, which effectively means compile this into the Spectrum's memory so we can run it, press play, and then having to wait 12 minutes while it read the program off this tape into the Spectrum. Absolutely crazy. So there you go. Fond memories of Spiky Harold. Yeah. Multiple graphics. He could jump up and down, and there were sound effects coming out. And Buggy Boy. I mean, I was playing a racing game. You think you got it lucky with Grand Theft Auto and Gran Turismo. This was the height of racing games back then. But interestingly, just like Dave mentioned earlier, the Spectrum came with one of these. That is an original, and that was it. And that, just like Dave, that is how I learned to program. You know, it told that you commands, and I mean, difficult to see. There it is. That was it. I mean, if you're a user of one of our resources at schools now, we give you pretty PowerPoints with icons in and little activities to go and do, and you can jump on the internet and learn programming from any YouTube. That was what introduced me to programming. And again, that was it. And basic, beginners all-purpose symbolic instruction code. That is where I learned to program. But it was so mind-blowingly new that I was fascinated, all from watching Chucky Egg, and I actually still have to this day. I'm just gonna solo me. I feel like this is some look at that. I just take this out of the sleeve. I'm a bit scared, Dave, to take this out the sleeve. I feel like it will fall apart. It is my first ever computer program that I wrote.
Oh, we can't really see that.
No, I know. There you go. But you can
almost see your fingers are in the way if you move your fingers.
Yeah, no, I could. There you go. Look at that. It feels like there should be along with the Magna Carta somewhere in a museum.
I was going to say, it looks like it's like from the Middle Ages or something.
And that was the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Now, that's a video all in itself. But there you go. if A equals then, I kind of down with that. But yeah, I've still got it to this day. My first ever computer program written in BASIC, learnt from a manual from the Spectrum 128K that I had to spend a year saving up for. Right, I tell you what.
We just finally
go on.
Wrap that up, because I know we're 40 minutes in, just very quickly. And of course, we were writing that. Well, I was writing these games in BASIC, and that was interpreted, and so it was, it was slow to execute, even in those days. And if you were a real games programmer, then you got your fingers dirty with assembly language. That's where it was at. If you wanted speed, then you wrote your game in assembly language. And I remember another friend writing his game in assembly language and looking at it and talking to him about, the mnemonics and what they meant and what it was doing. And it compared to the BASIC that I was writing, it looked completely gobbledygook. But amazing.
Well, look, I think we'll stop there, guys. But seriously, we've gone up to 1987. We can carry on with this, and I might actually be able to say a bit more now. The whole consoles are owned and bringing it up to, to date. So, if you like it, leave some comments in the video, obviously be polite. But little trip down memory lane. I managed to get through that entire video without saying back in my day. Although now I've gone and said it. But thank you very much again, everyone. And catch you again.
See you soon.
Bye, everyone.